Number 10, $1 Million Game. In October 2019, guests at a 4-star Switzerland hotel reported late-night disturbances in a room next door. When someone went to the room to check, they discovered the dead body of a British heiress on the bathroom floor. 22-year-old Anna Florence Reed from North Yorkshire was enjoying the round-the-world trip as her gift from her multi-millionaire father, Clive Reed. She decided to stay at a luxury lakeside Swiss hotel called La Palma à Loch in Locarno with her 29-year-old German boyfriend, Mark Schatzel. At around 3 a.m., guests staying in the neighboring rooms heard a couple arguing and complained to the hotel staff. A porter was sent to calm the situation down. However, a few hours later, a clearly agitated Mark appeared in the lobby and told the staff that his girlfriend was feeling sick. An ambulance was called, but medics were unable to revive her and she was pronounced dead. An autopsy report revealed Anna had been strangled to death. Of course, the blame was instantly put on the boyfriend as it appeared that she'd been strangled with a towel. Mark, on the other hand, said that it was a tragic sex accident gone wrong and nothing more. This is where it gets interesting though. 5 months after Anna's death, her credit card was found in a hotel lift, which can only mean one thing. Mark intended to steal money from the millionaire all along. As a result, he was eventually charged with murder. Number 9, false lookalike. In October 2021, a horse trainer was shot to death while she was staying at a Minnesota resort. However, a police investigation revealed that she wasn't even the real target. 46-year-old Bethany Bernatsky had only moved into the Cozy Bay resort a few weeks before. Her stay was pretty normal for the most part. Little did she know, though, that she'd get caught in the crossfire of a dangerous domestic drama unraveling across the street. Apparently, the accused gunman, 29-year-old Cameron Moser, was trying to get revenge on his ex-girlfriend, who was the daughter of the resort's former owners. His reasoning? She wasn't doing drugs with him anymore, so on one fateful day he had the twisted thought of ending her life. Now the thing is, Bethany looked a lot like Moser's ex-girlfriend. She had the same body structure, height, and hair color. He went to the resort armed with a rifle and a handgun. He saw Bethany from a distance and opened fire, mistaking her for his ex. Police were instantly alerted, and when they arrived, had a 2-hour standoff with Moser before eventually convincing him to put down his weapons. When they finally arrested him and went to check to see if everything was okay, they discovered Bethany's dead body. She had been shot multiple times. Moser is currently behind bars with a $1 million bond and faces a charge of second-degree intentional murder. Number 8, sketchy vacation rental. In November 2018, a Florida woman went missing after staying the night in a sketchy Airbnb apartment. Carla Stefaniak was visiting Costa Rica for her 36th birthday with her sister-in-law, April Antionetta. While they'd been together for the entire trip, April had to leave a day early due to some flight scheduling stuff. So Carla took her to the airport in an Uber, dropped her off, and returned to the Airbnb to prepare for her flight the following morning. Carla started to feel a bit uneasy as the place didn't seem very safe. In fact, she even called it sketchy in one of the texts she sent to her family. Her last message was received at around 8 p.m. when she said that she was going to ask a security guard for some water. No one heard from her after that. She never made her flight home. The authorities launched a search for her, but it wasn't until a week later that dogs sniffed out her body, which was partially buried and wrapped in plastic in a wooded area behind the complex. Clues led investigators to the guard of the vacation rental, the one Carla asked for water. 32-year-old Bismarck Espinoza Martinez was arrested and charged with murder. Martinez had used his position at the hotel to enter the room Carla was renting through Airbnb and kill her. Blood was found all over her room. According to the medical examiner, she suffered blunt force trauma to the head and she'd been stabbed 7 times, including her palm, which meant that she tried to defend herself against her attacker. Martinez was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Number 7, the Blue Lagoon. In July 2022, a newlywed Memphis pharmacist was murdered on her honeymoon while she was staying at a $2,000 a night resort in Fiji. 39-year-old Christy Chen Dawson was on a luxury holiday with her new husband Bradley at the Turtle Bay Resort, which is also the site of a movie called The Blue Lagoon. The pair had just gotten married 3 months prior and wanted to have a lavish honeymoon at this exotic resort. A couple of days into their stay, Christy was found in a pool of her own blood. She had been beaten to death in one of the private beach huts. Her new husband was nowhere to be found in the immediate aftermath. All signs pointed to him as the suspect, and he was eventually arrested and charged with her murder. But he said it wasn't wasn't him. He blamed one of the resort's private butlers. For context, each couple has their own private island on the resort with personalized tours, dinners, and other cultural experiences. On top of that, they've got a personal butler who arranges everything and guides couples through various off-site attractions that are designed to emulate an immersive Fiji experience. Bradley refused to submit his DNA for forensic testing. An investigation revealed that Bradley had actually been to the resort before with a previous wife. While Bradley has been charged with murder, he maintains his innocence and claims that Christie's death was an accident. The case is still playing out. What do you think will happen? Let us know in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 6. Red Sand. In September 2019, a transgender woman was found hacked to death on a beach resort in Bolinao, Pangasinan. Jessie Remedo, who worked at the Philippine resort called Valdevia, had just finished her shift for the day and was ready to wind down by getting a few drinks with her coworkers. While they were setting up for a fun night together, Jessie excused herself to go and buy cigarettes. Hours went by and she never returned. The next morning, someone walking along Patar Beach discovered her body. She was covered in blood, making the white sand around her look red. All she had on was her underwear and a red kimono-like top. She had been fatally stabbed in her neck and eye. Jessie was well known in the LGBTQ+ community, and it's unknown whether she was the victim of a targeted attack. Despite all the efforts to get to the bottom of the mystery, her killer hasn't been found to this day. Number 5. Hotel Death. In June 2019, 3 American tourists died of seemingly similar causes in less than a week at a Dominican Republic resort. 41-year-old Miranda Schaub Warner was celebrating her wedding anniversary with her husband at the Grand Bahia Principe resort in La Romana. After checking in, Miranda had a drink from the minibar. Moments after downing the drink, she had a heart attack and collapsed on the floor. Her husband and paramedics tried to resuscitate her, but there was nothing that they could do. Sadly, she passed away. Authorities chalked it up to her pre-existing heart conditions that may have been triggered, but just 5 days later, the same thing happened to a couple from Maryland, which meant that there was definitely something else at play here. Nathaniel Holmes and Cynthia Day checked into the resort a few days after Miranda's death. When they failed to show up in the lobby for checkout, the resort staff entered their room to check on them. They were both dead on the floor. There were no signs of violence, and similar to Miranda, it appeared that they both died of respiratory failure. Despite this eerie connection, no evidence was found linking Miranda to the couple or to anything malicious at the resort, so nothing really came of it. As of today, their deaths are still a mystery. Number 4. Rogue Employee. In May 2019, a Delaware woman was brutally beaten and left to die at a resort in the Dominican Republic. Tammy Lawrence Dadley had just checked into the Majestic Elegance Punta Cana resort a day earlier with her friends and husband. On the second night, she ventured out to a neighboring building to get some snacks because room service wasn't responding to her calls. There was a lounge on the beach that had what she needed, but to get there, she had to get through this shady rotunda between the buildings. As she was walking, she heard heavy footsteps approaching from behind. Before she could even react, she was knocked down to the ground. Looking up, she could see her attacker was wearing a resort security uniform. He pulled her to a maintenance room, and according to her, she tried to fight back, but he was too strong. For the next 8 hours, she was strangled multiple times to unconsciousness. Her attacker then dragged her down concrete stairs to an underground wastewater area where he kicked her in the head and beat her with a club. He then choked her one last time to finish her off and leaves her to die in a ditch. Thankfully, Tammy was eventually found and recovered by the resort security team. She doesn't know what else was done to her because she was in and out of consciousness during the whole ordeal. She spent 5 days in a hospital where she underwent surgery for her injuries. The resort has claimed no responsibility for the attack since she could not identify her attacker, even though she said he was wearing a uniform with the resort's logo. Number 3, if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. In July 2022, the chef of an Indian hotel stabbed a waiter multiple times with a kitchen knife. The reason? A food order gone wrong. Madhav Mandal had been working as the head chef at a 4-star hotel in Andheri East for almost a year. He'd never really shown aggression toward his co-workers during that time, but it seems like he may have binged Hell's Kitchen. When one of the waiters, Jagish Gagal, complained about the order he got from the chef, Mandal started an argument that kept getting increasingly combative until the hotel manager had to intervene. The next morning, Mandal and Jalal's argument from the night before heated right back up. This time around, though, there was no manager to break them apart. The two went back and forth until Mandal just snapped. He was chopping vegetables at the time and turned around and stabbed Jalal in the chest and back over and over again. The waiter was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late by that point. He succumbed to his injuries and died. The chef pleaded with the court that he wasn't in his right mind and the rage took control of his body, but it didn't matter. He was charged with murder and sent to prison. Number 2, senior trip to Mexico. During spring break in March 2021, a senior high school trip turned into a terrifying nightmare when students discovered a dead woman at their resort. Students from 3 different high schools, Lafayette, Eureka, and Kirkwood, were staying at the now Jade Riviera Resort some 25 miles or 40 kilometers south of Cancun. It was supposed to be a fun vacation, one to remember, as they were about to graduate and may never see each other again. While walking through the hotel grounds, 3 seniors stumbled upon a crime scene. Police were already there, but they could still see the bloody body of a woman that looked like she had just been murdered. But it was later found out that the woman had actually fallen from a balcony on the 4th floor. The victim was the mother of a student who was chaperoning the school trip. The tragedy added to the already bad streak of murders and shootings around resorts in Cancun. In fact, within the span of a couple months, at least a dozen tourists had been caught in turf wars between rival gangs, resulting in bystander casualties. The woman at the Jade Riviera fell from her room in what was deemed an accident, so there wasn't actually any malicious intent there. Number 1, the Dance of Death. In January 2021, a girl recorded a dance video for TikTok while getting ready for a birthday party. Minutes later, she was found dead in her hotel room. 16-year-old Kalisha Williams was staying at the Hyatt Regency Atlanta, where she had to get ready for a birthday celebration at another location. During her brief stay, she decided to record and upload a dance video for her TikTok. The video shows her happily dancing before appearing startled as if someone had just entered the room. Then the video cuts off. The video was made at around 12 a.m. 20 minutes later, she was being dragged out of an elevator by 2 guys saying that she'd been shot. Police arrived at the scene in the downtown hotel district and found the teen suffering from an apparent gunshot wound to the groin area. Kalisha was then rushed to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead. A suspect was later arrested and is being held at the Metro Youth Detention Center. Due to his age, his identity has not been released to the public. According to investigators, she got into an argument with a young male while they were in one of the rooms. Apparently, this fight led to the boy shooting her. The suspect was arrested and charged with felony murder, reckless conduct, and possession of a pistol. Number 10, knife-wielding maniac. In 2016, a backpacker from Britain named Mia Alif Chung faced a living nightmare while staying at a hostel in Queensland, Australia. The 21-year-old woman was attacked by a crazed man that shouted Allahu Akbar as he stabbed her to death. The attacker was 29-year-old Samal Ayad, a French national. Nobody knows exactly what happened with this guy, but police did say he was smoking marijuana before the incident. Then, during the attack, he was singing the national anthem of France. Mia and Ayad were sharing a room in the hostel, a common practice in establishments like this. It's believed that he had a crush on Mia, but she didn't like him back, and that's when the man grabbed a knife. In a fit of rage, he pulled Mia off of her bed by her hair and out onto the balcony while holding the weapon to her throat. The manager heard what was going on, and he and another person close by tried to approach Ayad, pleading with him to put the knife down. Instead, he stabbed Mia to death. When the other individuals tried to get her, Ayad lunged at them too. Along with Mia, Ayad also killed a 30-year-old man named Tom Jackson who was staying at the hostel. He then went outside and chased the hostel's dog, stabbing it to death as well before the officers arrived and subdued him. Number 9, hostile cannibal. In 2014, a 22-year-old woman named Sarah Yem had the unfortunate luck of meeting a cannibal named Matthew Williams. The crime took place at Surrey Arms, a hostel in South Wales. Along with being the typical hostel, this establishment is also used for housing homeless people in the area. The owner, Mandy Miles, was horrified after walking in on Matthew crouched over Ceres. His body and face were covered in blood, and she says his eyes were black and soulless. After walking into the scene, Mandy asked Matthew if he knew what he was doing to the young woman. In response, he simply said, "That's no girl." Apparently, he didn't realize what he was doing or who he was doing it to. At this point, it was pretty clear Matthew was a lunatic. Mandy knew Ceres was already dead, so instead of getting further involved, she trapped Matthew in the room and waited for the police. A female officer arrived first and shot him with a taser. Unfortunately, Matthew was killed in the process, so he could not be further questioned. It turns out Matthew had recently been released from prison before his stay at Surrey Arms. Despite the city council placing him there when he had nowhere else to go, Mandy and he was not told of his past or his schizophrenic diagnosis. Now, the owner is trying to ensure important data like this is shared beforehand to prevent any dangerous future encounters. Number 8. Creep at the Florida Hostel. The unthinkable happened at a hostel in Miami Beach. An unnamed woman was on vacation with her boyfriend and they went to a bar for a little partying. But at 1:30 in the morning, she felt tired and she left the club by herself and returned to the hostel. It's not clear why her boyfriend remained at the club, but he didn't just go back in with her. He probably assumed she would be safe since they were paying for a private room inside the hostel facility. When the woman got back to the hostel, it turned out to be anything but safe. Because her boyfriend didn't have a key to get back in, she left the door to her room slightly open. After getting in bed, a total stranger ended up strolling into her room and climbing into bed with her. This was the worst possible thing that could have happened. The stranger turned out to be 61-year-old Joel Patrick Bush, a total creep from Alabama. The vagrant then proceeded to assault the girl right there in the hostel. Luckily, things didn't get too far. She screamed as loud as she could, which was enough to draw attention and scare the guy out of the room. The police were quick to arrive to arrest him, charging him with 1 count of sexual battery. However, it was never revealed what the lunatic was even doing in Florida or how he managed to get into the secured building. Number 7. Mary Kate Hayes. Another British backpacker named Mary Kate Hayes fell victim to a senseless crime while staying in an Australian hostel. While there, the 20-year-old met a fellow traveler from Sweden. The two formed a positive acquaintance with each other, but things turned sour one morning at 4:30 when the man woke Mary up. According to the young woman, he was in a panicked and hurried state, asking if she would come on a road trip with him. She says his eyes were wide and he looked absolutely nuts. Despite this, she went with him and got in the car. Things got worse though when he wouldn't let Mary out of the vehicle. He told her they were headed to a town called Gympie, which is north of Brisbane. As the trip went on, he became increasingly erratic, ranting about extraterrestrials and saying he was an alien. Mary told news outlets that he kept going on and on about how she was, quote, the one, and how she was someone special. Starting to fear the worst, she shared her location with her dad, telling him not to call her in case the kidnapper noticed. Mary told her father the situation briefly over text and that he should call the police. He did this for her from thousands of miles away. Luckily, the dad was able to find the phone number for the authorities, and not long after, a cop car pulled Mary and the man over. They took her captor to get checked out at the hospital, and Mary was finally saved. Mary recognized the Swedish man was not mentally well and decided not to press any charges against him for the incident. What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 6. Burnt beds. In 2000, tragedy struck Queensland, Australia after a fire broke out in the Childers Palace Backpackers Hostel. The flames weren't lit by natural causes, but by a deranged homeless man named Robert Paul Long. On June 23rd at 12:30 at night, the fire started downstairs in the hostel. It began in the facility's recreation room, but quickly spread to other areas, causing the power to go out. With no electricity, neither the alarms or emergency lighting worked. Survivors from that night remember waking up in smoke-filled rooms, trying to get others up and out of harm's way. Authorities arrived less than 10 minutes after the flames erupted, but it had already grown to billows of smoke. The firefight lasted almost 4 hours, with 15 people dying in the incident. In a later investigation, it was discovered that 10 of these victims were trapped in an upstairs room where one of the bunk beds blocked the only viable exit. Robert Paul Long had previously stayed in the hostel, but was kicked out after not being able to pay. In the past, Long had made his hate of backpackers publicly known, and he apparently threatened to burn the facility down before June 23rd. That night, Robert tried to get into the hostel to beat up one of his former roommates, but the staff refused to let him in. Later on, another guest saw him using a computer in the building and reported it. Soon after this, the fire was lit. After such a tragic situation, Robert was arrested and sent to prison for life. Last year, he was denied parole. Even though 15 people died as a result of his actions, Long was only charged with 2 counts of murder. Number 5. Natalie Seymour. If you're a young British woman considering a backpacking trip, just make sure to be extra cautious and safe at hostels because, yet again, we have a story following a British backpacker. 22-year-old Natalie Seymour was traveling with her Canadian friend Abigail Amisola in 2019 in Cambodia. While staying at the Monkey Republic hostel, staff entered their room to find Abby and Natalie dead. The young women had been experiencing stomach issues, including vomiting, cramps, and chest pains. A quick look through Seymour's phone showed multiple Google searches asking about her symptoms. During their stay, other travelers brought them supplies like food and water to try and help, but nothing seemed to work. To make matters worse, the hostel was in a secluded area with no nearby hospital they could go to. It seems like one of the locals even tried to help the girls by taking them to a doctor, but on the way there, they passed out. So instead of taking them to the physician, the local just took them back to the hostel. Sadly, they died shortly after this. The exact cause of death is still unknown, but after an autopsy and inspection, liver damage was found. The doctor that performed the examinations believed it was caused by drug toxicity from taking over-the-counter seizure medication, but details are blurry. Number 4. Suitcase. In December 2020, the body of a young woman was found stuffed inside a suitcase at a hostel in London. It was 41-year-old Joanna Baraka, and her body was discovered after workers of the Pay and Sleep in West London complained about a disgusting, foul smell coming from the building. Joanna had been missing for nearly 5 weeks before her remains were located. Shortly after the suitcase was opened, the woman's boyfriend, 50-year-old Petra Zalinas, coincidentally went missing. Friends of Baraka say she was a sweet and gentle person who loved to paint. She met Zalinas after a series of unfortunate events caused her to lose her business and house. After this, she moved into the hostel with him. The friends also say Zalinas was a bad man who would sometimes hit and abuse Joanna. It's also suspected he had a severe drinking problem since Joanna would often go out to get him beer. The exact cause and details surrounding Miss Baraka's death is unclear. It's believed that Zalinas was somehow involved in the case and that he fled the country to avoid persecution. The investigation for this case is still ongoing, but hopefully justice will soon be served. Number 3. Paramedics. In September 2016, while responding to a call at a hostel in Queensland at 3:40 in the morning, a paramedic got more than she bargained for. The female professional was told a French backpacker wasn't feeling well and needed assistance, so she went to the scene along with another paramedic to get to work on the young French man. At first, the man seemed friendly, but then they could tell he had either been drinking or using drugs since he was acting a bit bizarre and agitated. Then, out of nowhere, he hit the paramedic with a spoon. The woman and her partner tried to get away back to their ambulance, but the man kept pursuing them. He rushed at the two, punching the woman in the face and yanking her out of the ambulance. Police arrived shortly after and arrested the lunatic, who apparently had some kind of mental issue. Last we heard, he was being charged for assaulting a public officer. Number 2. Collapsed roof. On January 5, 2006, a hostel collapsed in Saudi Arabia, taking the lives of 76 unsuspecting people. The incident happened in the holy city of Mecca during the sacred Hajj pilgrimage that made millions of people come to the city. Along with those killed, 62 were injured. Thankfully, more people weren't harmed since the hostel was practically empty at the time of the collapse. Most of the residents were away spending time at shrines. The victims were made up of travelers from many countries like Egypt, Indonesia, and more. Most of them had been in the surrounding area near shops and restaurants or in the market stalls at the base of the hostel. As far as what caused the building to fall, reports of a fire in a downstairs portion of the building were seen, but sprinklers went off and were supposed to put it out. The hostel was only about 25 years old and seemed to be in good shape as far as its structure, but still, the building fell. Almost 1,000 emergency personnel and rescuers were sent to the scene. Multiple large cranes were used to help clear the rubble, and residents in nearby buildings had to evacuate just in case this wasn't a one-off incident. They worked for hours trying to find people trapped under the debris. What was supposed to be a day full of worship turned into a living nightmare for people of Mecca. No one could have predicted such a terrible tragedy. Number 1. Grenade. Grenades are usually reserved for the battlefield or army testing, but in 2016 one was found near a hostel in Germany. The pin of the explosive device had already been pulled, but luckily the bomb failed and didn't go off. This particular hostel was reserved for migrant people and workers. When the grenade was first found, those in the hostel and surrounding buildings were quickly evacuated, while the bomb squad came to the scene to defuse the situation. Explosive material was still inside the grenade, but it's unclear why the small bomb failed to detonate. During 2015 alone, over 1,000 attacks on refugees and migrants were made. Many of the migrants in Germany came from Syria to escape the continuing war going on there. But with over 1 million new people, the government and cities had a difficult time finding suitable homes for all the refugees. In order to help solve this problem, Germany worked to identify other safe countries that refugees could return to. Number 10. The Final Hike. In September 2021, a Virginia woman was found dead in Montana's Glacier National Park just days after she'd been reported missing. 34-year-old Jennifer Coleman was an avid hiker who loved to explore the wilderness. She was super excited to tackle the 2 trails at Logan's Pass, but little did she know it turned out to be her final hike. National parks don't usually have cell reception, especially if you're deep in the woods, so when she went missing, it took a few days for someone to notice. In fact, it was her empty car in the parking lot that drew officials' attention and led to a rescue team looking for her. The search party of nearly 50 people was formed on a Friday as they all set out on a quest to find Jennifer and get her back to safety. But the feeling of dread started to grow with each passing hour of searching, and by Sunday, hopes of her survival had vanished. Everyone's fears finally came true when her body was found in a steep and rocky area next to the Continental Divide. Not only did her death send shockwaves across the hiking community, but it sent a ton of safety awareness foundations into motion. Interestingly enough, the cause of her death remains shrouded in mystery to this very day. Number 9. Unknown hazards. In August 2021, a California national forest was closed down after a couple was found dead on a trail. The cause of their death? No one really knows. 45-year-old Jonathan Garish was out for a nice family vacation in Sierra National Forest with his 31-year-old wife Ellen Chung, their 1-year-old daughter, and their family dog. To be fair, it would have been a weekend to remember if only Mother Nature hadn't come with other plans for them. The scorching sun brought out the heat while the inner trails harbored toxic gas. A couple of days into their fun hiking trip, a family friend reported that they'd gone missing since no one had heard from them. This obviously led to search parties being formed to find and retrieve them. Also, while the trail they were on was full of trees and shade, the unforgiving sun managed to raise the temperatures to over 109 degrees or just under 43 degrees Celsius that day. Plus, the trail also had some algae poisoning in the water in that area, which officials did warn everyone about. It seems like the family didn't heed the warnings though, since their dead bodies were found on the Mariposa County hiking trail just a few days later. Now here's where it gets interesting. Apparently the cause of their death was chalked up to unknown hazards in the area. The officials just couldn't pinpoint what exactly killed them. But in all seriousness, there were no signs of carbon monoxide poisoning from the mines, consumption of toxic chemicals, or even any strange things like guns or other weapons. And for this very reason, the trail was closed down for all tourists while panic ensued all over their mysterious deaths. Number 8. Leap of faith. In January 2022, a San Diego teacher was found dead by some hikers at the base of a granite formation in Joshua Tree National Park. 35-year-old Michael Spitz was a high school Spanish teacher at the Santa Fe Christian School who loved to hike and climb rock formations during his free time. So it was just a normal day in his life when he decided to head over to the California National Park for a weekend adventure. His goal? To do the 100-foot classic Illusion Dweller climb to the top of the Sentinel Granite Formation all by himself. Oh, and while it might sound scary to a rookie, this wasn't his first rodeo. As a matter of fact, he actually used this climb as a warm-up for more difficult ones nearby, and he knew it like the back of his hand. Besides, he'd free-soloed 5,000 feet or just about 1.5 kilometer climbs before, making this child's play in comparison. So no one really knows what happened that made him stumble and fall 80 feet or just about 24 meters to the ground at around 5 p.m. that Sunday. What makes the fall even more brutal is the fact that he didn't die on the spot. Instead, he survived the fall and passed at some point that night. It wasn't until 10 a.m. the next day when hikers stumbled upon his dead body. Apparently, Michael romanticized solo climbing and felt extremely confident in his ability, so much so that he was convinced he couldn't fall. But it was one of the easier climbs that claimed his life. Would you rather climb down a mountain or bungee jump straight into a ravine? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Number 7. Lost in the woods. In July 2017, a woman's dead body was found in the Sam Houston National Forest after she'd been reported missing by her husband. 55-year-old Teresa Kirkpatrick was out with her husband Alan to pick up a motorcycle that got stuck in the woods off Stubblefield Lake Road, and at some point during the search, she lost contact and straight up disappeared. Now at this point, the wise thing would have been to report the incident to officials, but Alan decided it would be a good idea to keep searching for her by himself, and after almost 8 hours of no luck, he finally gave up and headed to the police. Search parties were formed, and a day later her body was found deep inside the forest. Here's where it gets interesting. Her brother Kaiser claims that Alan killed her. Why? Well, according to him, she couldn't have gone into the wilderness alone because she had a bad back, suffered from diabetes, high blood pressure, and emphysema. What's more, she couldn't even bear the heat of her own porch for 30 minutes, so there's no doubt she couldn't handle a national forest. On top of that, her medical condition didn't let her go hiking or ride bikes, which makes this whole situation so suspicious. Oh, and apparently, Ellen also had a history of physical abuse, as Kaiser and some of the family members had to step in at times to defend her. But while there was definitely a precedent of violence there, the sheriff's department didn't actually find any visible signs of trauma on her body. Number 6. Freak Show. Last year in September, the disappearance of a social media influencer made international headlines when her fiancé returned from a road trip without her. 22-year-old Gabby Petito and her fiancé Brian Laundrie had a pretty wide social media presence as they documented their ambitious journey across the country. And one of the big staples of their adventure was how many different national parks they could visit. Everything looked great from the outside until social media updates stopped one day in August, and things really took a dark turn a week later when Brian returned from the journey without Gabby alongside him. At this point, he refused to talk to the police or even her family. Also, they couldn't contact Gabby either. In fact, the last text she sent out was around the same time their social media went dark, sparking even more suspicions about her safety. So with Brian not saying anything, her family reported her missing, and before the police could even trace her location, Brian bailed and disappeared himself. 2 days after this though, Gabby's body was found in Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming with clear signs of strangulation. Now, this obviously meant they had had a fight and Brian had murdered her on the trip. Oh, and apparently the last text that she had sent, that was sent by him too. But everyone got the shock of their lives when, after a month of searching, Brian's own skeletal remains were found inside the Carlton Reserve in Sarasota, Florida. So maybe there were even darker forces at play here. The case is still fresh in our minds though, and our hearts go out to Gabby's loved ones. Number 5. Into the Rainstorm. In April 2017, a mountain biker rode into the rainstorm in Olympic National Park and would never be seen alive again. 22-year-old Jacob Gray was fascinated by the idea of being one with nature and regularly went on trips throughout national parks with his bike. Little did he know, though, that his wishes of reconnecting with nature would unfold in the most tragic way possible. His last outing in Washington proved deadly as he cycled his way through a rainstorm to a summit at a nearby hill, but much to the dismay of his father Randy, he never made it back. Jacob's bike and gear were found on the side of a trail, and it looked like he'd been prepping a campsite nearby, since the tarp and other equipment were lying on the ground. He, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen, so his father sold his house, closed his business, and rallied some people to search for his beloved missing son. He spent months looking, all the while thinking what could have happened to his dear boy. Many thoughts crossed his mind, including accidents, murder, or even self-harm, as Jacob did have a history of some mental health issues. By August, he'd all but given up his search when he got a phone call that a group of researchers found Jacob's body much higher on the mountain than anyone would have thought, and the cause of death was labeled as hypothermia. Now, while Randy had lost his son to the forces of nature, at least he found peace in the fact that even during his final moments, he made his father proud by pushing himself and reaching new heights. Number 4. Vanished into thin air. In June 2021, an Irishman visiting Grand Teton National Park mysteriously disappeared without a trace, and to this day, his remains have yet to be found. 27-year-old Sion McLaughlin loved finding new trails and often went hiking during his time off, so it wasn't unusual for him to visit a national park to appreciate the grand scope of it. What was strange, though, was the fact that after his mini Wyoming vacation, he didn't show back up at work. McLaughlin was then reported as missing, with his last sighting putting him somewhere in the direction of Taggart Lake. His car was also found parked near the area. Now, the thing about this lake is that its 8-mile or just under 13-kilometer trail is notoriously difficult, and according to witnesses, he wasn't carrying a backpack, which is usually a recipe for disaster. At the same time, the trail was apparently one of his favorites, and he'd been through it multiple times. 45 helicopter rounds, high-tech tools, flyers, posters, hashtags, and literally everything was thrown into the search for Sion, who seemed like he'd vanished into thin air. Plus, false reports of his sighting didn't help either. In fact, one of these leads from 40-year-old Heather Myskaki led the police on a 500-hour wild goose chase, which resulted in her getting banned from the national park for 5 years. Despite everyone's continued efforts, Sion's remains still haven't been found, and his disappearance still puzzles minds to this day. Number 3. Fight for life. In October 2020, a California woman went missing for over 10 days in the cruel wilderness of Utah's Zion National Park. 38-year-old Holly Suzanne Cordier was set to go on a spiritual pilgrimage to unwind and rediscover herself, but the only thing she found was despair and agony. After getting dropped off by a private shuttle bus at the national park, Holly was supposed to roam around and come back 4 hours later to join the rest of the tourists, but she never did. Search parties were sent out to look for her as she turned into an online sensation, with people speculating all sorts of things about the case. Some even called her family's fundraiser a big scam, saying that the story of her disappearance didn't make sense. Also, she left her phone behind, so there was no way of even contacting the woman either. Even after a week of extensive searching, Suzanne was nowhere to be seen. This was not her time to die though. After 10 long days of searching, she was found. Holly was famished, many pounds lighter, and extremely dehydrated. She was also concussed, had kidney failure, and multiple foot injuries thanks to hypothermia. But most of all, what she did have was the will to live, as she brilliantly survived her way through the wilderness for over a week and returned a hero for living through it all. It must have been some spiritual journey for sure. Number 2, nowhere to be found. In May 2013, a man in the Canadian Army Reserve went on a 1,700-mile or just over 2,700-kilometer road trip to Kosciuszko National Park and never made it home. 25-year-old Pradeep Shran was an exchange student on Australia's Gold Coast when he randomly decided to drive to Melbourne to hike up some mountains. So he rented a van, drove up to the national park's Charlotte Pass, and set out on his quest to summit the peak in dense snow. But of course he never returned from the journey. In fact, no one even noticed he disappeared until the rental company reached out to his family to ask about the missing vehicle. And from that point on, the search for Shran began. Now, we don't quite know for how many days after his disappearance the search started, since people only found out about it when the van's rental time had expired. So for all intents and purposes, he could have been missing for weeks. After 2 weeks of searching, the Australian authorities called off the search. Shran's parents then hired private investigators to look for him, and using the hike plans found on his laptop in the van and some other tower data from his phone, they were able to track his trail to the treacherous Western Fall Wilderness. But despite a year-long private search, his body was never found. Number 1, Glacier of Death. In July 2022, Montana's Glacier National Park claimed the life of 3 experienced climbers, all within just a few days of each other. 67-year-olds Brian Kennedy and Jack Beard were climbing partners and regularly visited national parks to seek thrills. In fact, they'd been hiking Glacier's towering peaks for decades, and often visited so often that the park staff knew them personally. So it was a shocking revelation when they didn't return home as planned 3 days after they'd started their journey. It didn't take long for rescuers to find their bodies, as they'd taken a pretty common path. With that being said, the cause of their death remains unknown. They weren't the only ones to suffer this fate during that week though. Just a day after their bodies been found, 79-year-old Bob Biondi from Florida also fell to his death while climbing off a steep trail slope on the Rising Wolf Mountain with some of his friends. And while officials say these 2 incidents weren't linked to each other, they're also a stark reminder of the risks involved with climbing rock formations that can fall apart so easily right under your feet. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be lost in a national park alone for 3 days or get attacked by a wild animal while hiking? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.